Before I even say anything review-wise, I should remind everyone that overrated is not the same as bad. This is kind of a funny thing to clarify, considering up until a few days ago, I hated Clannad's guts. The first time I watched it, I had the expectations of it being some pinnacle of writing in regards to drama or whatever people hype it up to be. It not only failed to meet those expectations, but put them into a box, lit the box on fire, then threw it off a bridge while making overdramatic poses. I rewatched it for the sake of making this video, and it was a lot easier to enjoy it when my expectations were it being absolutely terrible. Of course, there's still plenty of faults with the show, but there was also a decent amount I enjoyed. Though what I find absolutely hilarious is that my biggest complaint against the show could have been fixed with a very simple executive decision. Well, that and the fact that for a lot of the things the show did wrong, it also had an example of how to do that exact thing correctly. You'll see what I mean. Oh, and this only covers the first season, because seasons are required to stand on their own merits. Also because I've heard all the things I liked about Clannad get toned down in After Story, and all the things I hated got cranked up. Yay. Jumping straight into one of the biggest issues, most of the female cast are about as interesting as wet toilet paper. They either have no discernible personality, seem to have no actual reason for liking Tomoya, or both. Well, okay, to be fair to Nagisa, she does have somewhat of a personality, it's just an extremely obnoxious one. The whole cares about others more than herself deal is an alright personality trait, but the only other one she has is stupid. No, I mean it as in it literally is a stupid personality. And it's the incredibly annoying kind of stupid where they say des at the end of every sentence. The thing is almost a cheat code to make any character seem twice as dumb. Now I could spend minutes just pointing at each character randomly and detailing them, but I should be a bit more orderly about this. I'm going to go through each character arc chronologically, as dictated by the show, and address my complaints and compliments for each one and the character the arc is for. First up is Fuko's arc, and there's only one thing to say right off the bat when it comes to this one. What in the hell is Fuko? You see, for any story, there's an important line to set decently early on, the boundary of realism. Stories aren't as simple as realistic or unrealistic. There's millions of lines between those two. Some stories will have magic be a common occurrence, while the idea of ghosts is preposterous, and others will have vice versa, where ghosts are prominent and the idea of magic is non-existent. With Fuko, it's impossible to establish that line because you're never told what the bloody hell she is. Is she a ghost or an apparition? No, because the characters are able to touch her. Is she just a figment of everyone's imagination, seeing as how she gets forgotten over time? No, that can't be it, since apparently she's still wandering around even when people can't see her. Without this line, you don't know where to set your expectations in regards to phenomena happening. For all you know, a magical unicorn that grants wishes will show up to solve everyone's problems. And yes, there's the whole otherworld deal going on with the girl and the junk robot, but it's made very obvious that it's disconnected from the main story. Oh, and the whole hit counter thing when Tomoyo kicks Sunahara, that's done for comedic effect, so it's obvious that it's also disconnected from the legitimate events that happen in the main story. Now you may say, well, it's not important what she is. But it is. You see, since the main drama is revolving around her disappearing from people's sights and memories, it's important to know the context behind it. Why? Because if the audience starts to question the concept, the immersion is completely broken. Take, for example, the scene where Sunahara has forgotten her, but she's standing there with a starfish carving. So, can he not see the starfish carving too? Is there not just some random wooden carving floating in the air? When Fuko puts it in his hands, he looks down and wonders where it came from. Okay, so I guess things Fuko is touching also can't be seen. But wait, that doesn't make sense, because there's a few times where Tomoya tries to show her to people and he puts his hands on her shoulders. He doesn't suddenly disappear from their sight, so I guess it's just Fuko they can't see. But then that doesn't make any sense, because people would see floating starfish carvings and a party hat going all over school. Speaking of which, why does nobody ever trip over Fuko? I mean, if she's always walking around school and people can't see her and she can be extremely airheaded, so then wouldn't that make sense that people would walk into her? My mind is trying to make sense of what Fuko is even when her arc is at its end, so I'm not able to appreciate anything. It certainly doesn't help that they break their own pre-established rules at the end by having her magically float down to her sister who can for some reason now see her. I don't know, maybe I'm just not a romanticist, but I feel like if you're going to bring fantasy elements into an otherwise very grounded story, you'd better have a damn good explanation for it all. Though it wouldn't even matter if I was able to enjoy the arc, because the show proceeds to shit all over the struggles and drama that was in later episodes by having Fuko randomly show up for comedic relief. I'll admit these sections are pretty funny, but it completely destroys the themes and such from her arc, essentially making it seem like a humongous waste of time. The one thing saving it is that Fuko's arc isn't actually just about her, but I'll save that for later. Oh, and there's also the fact that the arc is funny. I mean, the show in general is funny when it wants to be, but Fuko and Tomoya bounce well off each other as far as both actions and dialogue goes. Even when it was one-sided, like when Fuko spaces out, it's still funny to watch Tomoya troll her. The next arc is Katomi's, and there isn't much to say about it actually. Honestly, the only purpose to the arc seemed to be to introduce the topic of the microscopic world, which never even ends up playing a part in this season. I'm guessing it's a setup for after story or something. There's an overall aspect to the series that becomes prominent starting in this arc that I'm going to talk about. However, I first want to address the blatant plot hole in the ending to the arc before I get to that. Kotomi's story ends with her parents' suitcase being found and being delivered to her. This is due to a letter that was found in it with writing on the envelope that said to deliver the suitcase to their daughter if it was found. When and why did they write that? The story says her parents died when they went down with a plane due to a breaking or something along those lines. Did they write it as the plane was plummeting to its doom? The writing was pretty neat and they were even able to put their signatures or whatever, so that seems unlikely. Besides, why would they just happen to have some paper and an envelope handy for the situation? So does this mean that they wrote that letter ahead of time? But then why would they need to write a letter like that ahead of time? Weren't they just going to give her the gift when they got back from their business trip? Considering the resolution of this arc is how her parents loved her so much and got her the stuff to bear, this kind of plot hole completely disintegrates the whole dramatic tone the show is going for once you notice it. And speaking of dramatic tones, this is the arc where Key shows their usual methods of generating drama, which is by making people cry and being overdramatic to the point of being unrealistic. The scene I'm talking about, at least it was one for me, was where child Kotomi goes into her father's study and burns what she thinks is a copy of the thesis. First of all, the idea of burning it rather than just shredding it up doesn't seem like something a child would do, but it's somewhat passable since if I recall, the matches were right nearby, so that could have put the idea in her head. However, a kid would not then proceed to sit in a corner and cry their eyes out while the room starts to catch fire. It also irked me that child Tomoya was able to grab the doorknob and open the door when a good portion of the room was on fire. Realistically, that doorknob would have been pretty hot at that point. Perhaps not boiling hot, but he wouldn't have been able to calmly grab it for a few seconds before thrusting the door open. Then child Kotomi is still sitting in the corner and crying. At this point, a child would have gotten the hell out of that room due to the heat, and she would have started suffocating, or maybe even died from the smoke the fire would have caused in that room. This is why drama is a tricky subject to write. You want to be as dramatic as possible for maximum effect, but if you go just slightly too far, the audience's immersion and suspension of disbelief will be broken. This can be different for each person, sure, but there's usually still a general line you do not want to cross. For example, the scene in episode 22, where Akio yells at Nagisa on stage to not worry about him or Sanai is just stupid. The message itself was not, but it was ruined with incredibly overdramatic emotions on Akio's part and a ridiculous amount of dramatic camera angles on part of the show itself. If they hadn't done those two things, it honestly would have been more dramatic. This is also an example of something the show also manages to do right, though. This being the tension between Tomoya and his father. It never does anything overdramatic between the two, or even completely explain the story behind it. You just see Tomoya looking disappointingly at his father, or sometimes when his dad tries to do something, Tomoya gets this seriously pissed off look on his face and then leaves. Those interactions are miles more dramatic than shoving the camera into people's crying faces or having them do over-the-top hand and arm motions when talking. But getting back to child Kotomi, there's another point I want to address. Why do key works always revolve the drama and tragic backstories around little girls? I mean, it's your choice what characters you want to do. It's your work after all. But the fact that it's always girls, usually young ones at that, makes me a bit wary of Key. Are they not confident enough to write drama for male characters or just adults? Or are they scared that they won't be able to force tears from people unless they have these bad things happen to young girls? As I said, it's up to the writer what they want to write, but it just seems slightly suspicious, like they aren't confident enough in their own writing, so they feel like making little girls cry is a good fallback to make the audience sad. Which reminds me of the last point in regards to drama I wanted to mention, the massive focus on characters crying. Now, having characters cry is not inherently a bad thing. After all, it's natural to cry when bad things happen. But when you focus way too much on the characters crying, it's almost like the show doesn't feel like you'll feel genuinely sad for what's happening, so they try to make you cry by showing other people crying. This is stupid and exploitative because it unfortunately works on some people. Nothing against those people. All my blame goes on the writers and or director of the show. Wait, why is that a bad technique, I hear you ask? Well, other than it being shallow as all hell, it's basically the equivalent of a laugh track. If writers or directors don't feel like the audience will know when to laugh or think the jokes aren't funny, they'll have a laugh track so that the audience is subconsciously told, this is where you're supposed to laugh. After all, laughing is contagious, and people want to treat crying in the same manner. Now, some shows are more guilty of this than Clannad, but they still do it.